Let's decipher this North Pole, Antarctica. Arctic equals Christ. Antarctic, Antichrist. What you think about that?
I think a little background on the North Pole is in order, and then I will move forward in time to uncover what may sit at the North Pole. So let me jump straight in with who was the first explorer who actually made it to the North Pole in modern times. It may surprise some of you to know that it was not any of the famous explorers praised in the Western press as being the pioneers of such an achievement. It was in fact a man called Matthew Alexander Henson, the first Afro-American Arctic explorer, was the first man to reach the North Pole, of which he was co-discoverer with Robert Peary. Peary wrote in his journal that open sea existed at the North Pole. This, of course, is in complete contradiction to the images we are allowed to see on Google Earth and from any overhead satellites. Henson and Peary made 7 voyages over a period of nearly 23 years. There is some debate as to whether Peary was accurate in his claim to have reached the pole, but Henson went ahead to blaze the trail while Peary, whose toes were frozen, was pulled on a sledge. Henson reached the pole some 45 minutes ahead of Peary and planted the American flag at the location Peary determined to be the pole, since Peary was unable to stand. As one would expect of those times, Henson was not given the appropriate credit. Peary received many accolades for his accomplishment, but was also criticised for not taking along a white man. And while Peary was lauded by many for his achievements, he and his team faced wide scepticism, with Peary having to testify before Congress about allegedly reaching the North Pole due to the lack of verifiable proof, which in my mind was just another way of saying, you should have took a white guy. I will leave a link in the description below so you can read the full story from which I have just quoted from. Now, all of this, of course, places the recording of the North Pole firmly in the calendar of the modern era. But to understand the curiosity the North Pole has had for millennia, we have to travel back further into history to fully grasp the roots of this Hyperborean world. Hyperborea refers to an area in the distant north, from the Greek words hyper, meaning beyond, as in hyperspace or hyperactive, and borea, referring to the northern wind, as in the aurora borealis. According to legend, the inhabitants of Hyperborea were giants, with lifespans of thousands of years, and enjoyed lives of complete happiness without sickness or misery. The ancient Greeks were reputed to have dealings from time to time with the long-lived inhabitants of Hyperborea, as recounted by their folklore and mythologies. There are 2 fundamental points of view concerning the mythologies of ancient civilizations. A, the mythologies are pure fabrication on the part of the civilizations to which they are attributed, and B, the mythologies have their roots in true events and have been embellished as they were handed down over the ages. The idea of an entrance into a hollow earth far to the north has been mentioned by many, from the legends of the Greeks as mentioned to the stories of Agartha and Shambhala. Concerning Agartha, Professor Henrique de Souza, president of the Brazilian Theosophical Society and leading authority on the subterranean world, wrote, "Among all races of mankind, back to the dawn of time, there existed a tradition concerning the existence of a sacred land or terrestrial paradise, where the highest ideals of humanity were living realities. This concept is found in the most ancient writings and traditions of the peoples of Europe, Asia Minor, China, India, Egypt, and the Americas. This sacred land, is said, can be known only to persons who are worthy, pure, and innocent, for which reason it constitutes the central theme of the dreams of childhood. The road that leads to this blessed land, this invisible world, this esoteric and occult domain, constitutes the central quest and a master key of all mystery teachings and systems of initiation in the past, present, and the future. This magic key is the open sesame that unlocks the door to a new and marvellous world." The old Rosicrucians designated by the French word vitriol, which is a combination of the first letters of the sentence, vista, intoria, terra, rectificandio, ignes omni lapidem. It is to simply indicate the interior of the earth is hidden in true mystery. The path that leads to this hidden world is by way of initiation. In ancient Greece, in the mysteries of Delphos and Eleusis, this heavenly land was referred to as Mount Olympus and the Elysian Fields. Also, in the earliest Vedic times, it was called by various names, such as Ratnasanu, which means peak of the precious stone, Hamadri, mountain of gold, and Mount Meru, home of the gods and Olympus of the Hindus. Symbolically, the peak of this sacred mountain is in the sky, its middle portion on the earth and its base in the subterranean world. The Scandinavian Eddas also mentions this celestial city, which was in the subterranean land of Asgard, of the peoples of Mesopotamia. It was the land of Amenti, of the sacred book of the dead of the ancient Egyptians. It was the city of the 7 petals of Vishnu, and the city of the 7 kings of Edom and Eden of Judaic tradition. In other words, it was the terrestrial paradise. In all Asia Minor, not only in the past but also today, there exists a belief in the existence of a city of mystery full of marvels, which is known as Shambhala. It is also the Ur-Damph of the Tibetans and the Mongols. The Persians called it Alberdi, or Arana, land of their ancestors. The Hebrews called it Canaan, and the Mexicans Tula or Tolan, while the Aztecs called it Mayapan. By the Celts, this holy land was known as land of the mysteries, Duat or Dandana. A Chinese tradition speaks of the land of Chivin, or the city of a dozen serpents. It is the subterranean world, which lies at the roots of heaven, and it is the land of Kalkas, or Kalis or Kalki, the famous Kolchia for which the Argonauts sought when they set out in search of the Golden Fleece. As you see, the northern world is rich in ancient recollections and still holds mystery today for many explorers. This mountain of the gods, referred to by many spiritual, religious and occult followers, is further supported by the Mercator map from 1559. It shows the North Pole to have what was described as a magnetic island, a mountain. In order to fully understand what was located prior to Mercator's map being completed, we pop over to Wiki to get a sense of what was discovered then and covered up to this day. So here we are on Wikipedia, and this page is entitled Inventio Fortunata. And basically it means fortune or fortune-making discovery. And the first entry in this is a lost book, probably dating from the 14th century, containing a description of the North Pole as a magnetic island, or otherwise known as Rupes Nigra, surrounded by a giant whirlpool and 4 continents. No direct extracts from the document have been discovered, but its influence on the Western idea of the geography of the Arctic region has persisted for several centuries. Now, I'm not going to go down into all of the details here because I've already got the other page open, which referred to the Rupes Nigra. The Rupes Nigra, or Black Rock, a phantom island, was believed to be a 33-mile wide black rock, or mountain. Mercator actually describes the rock's circumference as 33 French miles, located at the magnetic North Pole, or at the North Pole itself. It purportedly explained why all compass points to this location. The idea came from a lost work entitled, as I've just mentioned, Inventio Fortunata. The island features on maps from the 16th and 17th century, including those of Gerardus Mercator and his successors. Mercator describes the island in a 1577 letter to John Dee. In the midst of the 4 countries is a whirlpool into which there empties these 4 indrawing seas which divide the north, and the water rushes around and descends into the earth just as if it were pouring it through a filter or a funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on every side of the pole, that is to say 8 degrees altogether, except that right under the pole there lies a bare rock in the midst of the sea. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it's all of magnetic stone. This word for word, everything I copied out of this author's Jacob's Coignan years ago. And you can see the original map he was referring to with this magnetic island sticking out of the North Pole, surrounded by the 4 continents. And I just want to finish off this part by showing you this image here, which is part of the Carta Mariana of 1539 by Olaus Magnus, depicting the location of the magnetic north, vaguely conceived as Insula Magnetum, Latin for island of magnets. And as you can see from this image here, he shows it quite clearly, if I can get that up there for you. So there you can see this island of magnets depicted there. Now, you will also recall that this island of magnets, or this, as you said here, the rock in the midst of a sea, as mentioned here in Rupes Nigra, that Perry, remember in his diary, said that there was open sea at the North Pole, which obviously from our point of view on Google Earth and other suppliers of images, satellites, NASA and other words, there is nothing as far as open sea is concerned, but then that's usually accompanied by a big black hole of data. So let's pop back to the original episode. If you think these are simply stories of old, you may want to hold off on that assumption for now, because throughout the ages, these stories have persisted even amongst some of the most celebrated scientists. The famed British royal astronomer Edmund Halley was the first to chart the constellations of the entire southern hemisphere and is credited with the discovery of the celebrated Halley's Comet. In 1692, due to the work of Isaac Newton had accomplished regarding the relative masses and gravitational interactions of the Earth with the Moon, Halley announced that the Earth is likely a concentric shell of hollow spheres with a molten luminous core that sheds light upon the inner hollow spheres. He further postulated that there was indeed an atmosphere within these concentric layers that sustains life, and the emanations at the poles known as the Aurora Borealis and Aurora Australis were energetic ejections from the inner Earth layers, and not the solar ejections that we now claim they are today, bouncing off the Earth's magnetic field. Halley used his theory to explain the existence of more than one magnetic pole. Indeed, his theory was far ahead of its time and far more accurate than is accounted for by the modern scientific establishment. Others agree with Halley's idea of hollow Earth, such as the Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler and the Scottish mathematician John Leslie. Though some of these assertions are disputed, obviously, Halley's hard work won scientific accomplishments throw a considerable weight behind his work, and his theories of the hollow Earth are certainly not to be taken lightly. As we move forward in our time, our next stop is the reports from the expedition made by Olaf Jansen. He emigrated to America in 1889 with a small fortune after selling his fishing boats. His journey in 1829 with his father, which he claims they journeyed into the inner realms on his boat, set the direction of later expeditions. Olaf Jansen was interviewed on many occasions and spoke of sailing over the horizon and the compass needle being influenced more by his boat than the pull of the pole, which, if you think about it, given those magnetic mountains we mentioned earlier of the Mercator map, is not surprising. His explanation was they were travelling for about 300 miles through the mouth of an opening until they reached what he described as a tropical island. Upon arrival, he met with giant humanoids and saw trees the size of which he had never seen. They were, according to Olaf, invited onto an even greater ship than theirs that they had arrived in. It seems to be some sort of cruising liner, he mentioned, of a design they had never witnessed before. Olaf went on in great detail to describe his time in the hollow Earth. Bunches of grapes 4 to 5 feet in length, The ship he had been invited onto cut through the water at speeds he had never experienced before. He spent a year learning their language before being allowed to meet the ruler of the Inner Earth realm. The story goes on in great detail, but for the purposes of this episode, I will give you his last words on the matter. He ends his version of events by saying, "It is now 1 hour past midnight. The new year of 1908 is here, and this is the 3rd day thereof. And having at last finished the record of my strange travels and adventures I wish given to the world, I am ready and even longing for the peaceful rest which I am sure will follow life's trials and vicissitudes. I am old in years and ripe both with adventures and sorrows, yet rich with the few friends I have cemented to me in my struggles to lead a just and upright life. Like a story that is well nigh told, my life is ebbing away. The presentiment is strong within me that I shall not live to see the rising of another sun. Thus I do conclude my message." They do not sound like the ramblings of a lunatic. In fact, they sound like the words of a humble man who had, in reality, experienced exactly what he had said. I will leave a link in the description below, for it makes fascinating reading and goes into such detail of the realm he discovered over the lip of the entrance all those years ago. I'm sure some of you will enjoy reading it. Our next group of adventurers, who again spoke of the entrance to the inner realms, is from the Second World War, namely U-Boat 209. The reports are scant, but I did manage to find an old message relating to the voyages from the conversations of a researcher named Rodney Clough, who, in his book, included the translation of a letter sent by one of the submariners aboard the U-209, and it reads as follows, as you can see here. "Among those on the U-209 was an old friend, one Carl Unger. I received this communication sometime after the war had ended. I know it is genuine, as I know his handwriting very well. The approximate English translation of Carl's letter is as follows. Dear old comrade, this news will be a surprise for you. The U-209, undersea boat, made it. The earth is hollow. Dr. Haushofer and Hess were right. The whole crew is well, but they cannot come back. But we are no prisoners. I am sure this news will reach you. It is the last connection with the U-Boat 209. We will meet again, comrade. I am worried for everyone who has spent his life on the surface since the Führer is gone. God bless our Germany always. With hearty greetings." I did look into the details of U-209 and found it did indeed operate in and around the North Pole at the time stated. As you can see here, I screen captured the log of its journey from the archives, and obvious that the Allied forces had times when it was not able to locate all enemy vessels, but it puts the U-boat in the area for most of its operational journeys. It's also important to note it went missing or was sunk since it's never returned back to port. These historical references to the North Pole would not be complete if I did not make mention of Admiral Byrd's exploits to the North Pole. In 1926, Lieutenant Commander Byrd turned his sights to flying to the North Pole. He gained the support of the National Geographic Society, but needed additional funds to finance the attempt, so he went to wealthy benefactors like John D. Rockefeller, who chipped in, also along with Ford. There are numerous accounts floating around about the claims he found an entrance to the inner world, the hollow earth, and even in his own interviews hinted at the untouched continent filled with trees, streams and mountains beyond the ice. Many have mixed the reports from the North and South Poles together to form a narrative to support the hollow earth theory, but I feel there is no need to, since, as Byrd himself stated in his logs from the North Pole, his compass was spinning wildly as he flew over land that should not have been there. And if you recall we looked at the Mercator map, that land he was referring to may well have been the magnetic mountain. As for the later reports of his experience from dubious sources, it should be taken with a pinch of salt and does not serve any real purpose other than to add mud to the waters of our efforts to find the truth. But, by all reports, Roald Amundsen got there first, since Byrd's arrival at Spitsbergen port was blocked by a Norwegian gunship supporting Amundsen's expedition and refused to let Byrd dock. He had to load his plane onto lifeboats just to get it on shore, which gave Amundsen a time to get a head start. As for reports of the inner world, Byrd seems to have confirmed and or repeated the experience of other intrepid explorers, so I find that it does support the idea of an entrance at both ends of the world. But let's now turn to the modern world and examine what clues are to confirm or deny an entrance to this fabled or factual world within. Rather than trying to find what is there, I have taken the stance to look at the opposite direction. That is to say, there are many instances where a deliberate attempt at hiding what this area may have to show us is deliberately hidden. It was not difficult to locate several examples of authorities being reluctant to show a clear image of what sits at the North Pole. As you can see in this short clip, NASA tends to close the window on the opportunity to view this area via the International Space Station. You have to ask yourself, what do they not want you to see? Why cut the feed or close the shields at the exact moment they pass over the region of the North Pole, which is, what most people have an interest in? Would it not be obvious that if there was nothing there, as they claim, to keep it open and dispel the stories once and for all? Or are they just adding to the myth, keeping it going as any good disinformation authority would? Or, in stark contrast to NASA's ISS footage that you've just seen, a few years ago, when the Mir space station was orbiting the northern regions, this video emerged claiming it to be the view from the space station's cameras, where they continued to film this huge anomaly. It was supposedly filmed back in 1996 and released by an ex-NASA worker. Now, I am expecting some to immediately shout fake, but without you, the viewers' help, observations and comments as to why or how this in fact is fiction or fact, is part of my channel's remit. So I will leave it for you to comment as to its authenticity. As you can see in this clip, If it's fake, it's an impressive effort. If it's real, then we have a world-changing discovery that has been covered up and ignored by humanity. But whatever is the case, I will let you be guided by your own eyes. Here is another example, purportedly showing the entrance at the North Pole. However, my own impression at first glance was that it is the eye of a storm. It has not been without notice over the years that authorities themselves put out these types of videos to place doubt and discredit upon real discoveries in an attempt to, as it were, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is common practice to seed the internetosphere with fake information and let the masses argue and stay confused over everything. Standard practice when it comes to disinformation, which is why it is important for you to make up your own mind without any leading comments from people such as myself. It got me thinking that if we're not allowed to see the possible entrance, then what can we use to see through the deceit that many claim exists? What if we could use other means to penetrate the cloud cover or bypass NASA's attempt at allegedly hiding what many believe is the entrance to Hollow Earth? Let me introduce you to the weather satellite and the readings of the thermal changes recorded at the North Pole in this clip. As you can see here, something just does not add up. How can a supposedly solid mass of ice produce heat exactly at the North Pole, which is that red area you see there? What natural forces can emit such heat escaping into the atmosphere and dissipate as we move further from the center point of the heat source? And what is the heat source? I recorded this feed from Discover magazine's website. If you have an explanation other than it's an upwelling from an internal heat source, then leave a comment below. Another way to view the North Pole is an image taken from sciencephoto.com. Shows the ozone layer at the North Pole, or, in this case, the lack of it. The explanation of the black region was that they could not get a reading because it was nighttime. And there was me thinking sensors took samples of the air to indicate CO levels irrespective of what time of day it was. And I found it incredulous that day and night had such a hard edge to it. The actual caption for this read, satellite map showing the ozone layer over the northern hemisphere on January the 5th, 1986. The ozone is most concentrated in red and yellow in the ring around the Arctic. The black area over the pole is where no data was obtained due to the Arctic night. Well, given the previous efforts to block the view of the North Pole, it seems more than a coincidence that we should be blocked yet again. As I have stated on previous episodes, I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. In these next images, showing and warning of ozone layer depletion now brings an alternative view into perspective, and one that makes perfect sense if you consider the contents of this video that we've covered already. There was and never is an ozone layer at these 2 points because they are in fact openings, and the natural forces at work make this a perfectly normal occurrence rather than damage as reported by so many in the know. And do you not find it interesting that the ozone depletion matches that of both North and South Borealis? Let us not forget the thermal imaging that I showed you earlier, which again matches the ozone so-called depletion at both poles with heat coming from the interior of the planet because it simply can't come from ice. I then took to looking at the live flight tracker and overlaid that with the path of satellites when orbiting the Earth. And yet another coincidence. No flights, either commercial or high orbital, seems to fly over the pole. So again, we are left with a large black hole of unaccountable geography. Many years ago, an official NASA site, which is no longer maintained, released an image of the Northern Lights with a small but important side note. It read, "This figure depicts the oxygen, helium and hydrogen ions that gush into space from regions near the Earth's pole. The faint yellow gas shown above the North Pole represents gas loss from Earth into space. The green gas is the aurora borealis, or plasma energy pouring back into the atmosphere." Notice it stated the borealis is pouring back into the atmosphere. So one can conclude it started on Earth and not as a result from the solar winds. Is it not more likely that borealis is a result of the same mechanisms that emanate from within the Earth rather than outside of it, given the previous heat map I showed you? The explanation from science of what forms the northern and southern lights is the Earth's magnetic field is being energized by the solar winds. In other words, what you see is due to the sun's activities and not an Earth-generated phenomena, which, if you keep watching, will be proven to be a ridiculous claim even by NASA's standards. My obvious next step was to check if the South Pole had anomalous geothermal activity resulting in abnormally high temperatures, and sure enough, it mimics its northern counterpart, as mentioned in a report from the well-respected nature.com. Now, this could be put down to sub-ice thermal vents from volcanoes since they are known to be there, but I find it interesting that up at the North Pole, no such explanation is possible, and yet there it is. Can we categorically state the Earth is hollow and the holes or entrances are in fact a reality at the poles? In order to answer that question, it would be logical to check to see if the rest of our solar system has similar anomalies and establish a principle of nature rather than rely on the possible deceptions of the few. We now take a look at the scientific discoveries which abound in our solar system. We can start in our own backyard by looking at the many spinning systems in nature. Hurricanes, tornadoes, whirlpools or water vortices, they all have an inner space that is void of the matter which surrounds it. That hole is not isolated to these earthbound examples. It is clear that all spinning systems in nature has a hole at its center. It pushes matter using centrifugal force, and anyone with a basic knowledge of physics knows that to be the case. The Earth itself, we are told, does not have these holes, but the problem with that statement becomes obvious if we take a look at other planetary bodies. Saturn emits heat from inside its spinning body, and the light or heat signature you see is not a reflection from the sun, but the internal heat being evacuated from the planet itself. A bit like the heat signature we saw at our own North Pole in that geothermal GIF. Our own Arctic winds, as seen here, converge on this supposedly non-existent hole at the North Pole. Then we have Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, spewing out gases and energy. Cassini probe found that the southern polar plume from geysers on Enceladus' South Pole contains 20 times more organic material than was previously expected. Scientists stated to have a primordial material coming out from inside a Saturn moon raises many questions on the formation of the Saturn system. Titan is another example of heat being ejected from the North and South Poles, although some scientists maintain this is a reflection from the sun. It seems clear it is coming from inside the spinning sphere and not a reflection. The fact that no matter what angle the image is taken at, the hot spot remains in the same geographical location on Titan's surface, so it cannot be a reflection from the sun. Just goes to show you there's a stark difference between intelligence and common sense. Again, here is an image of the South Pole of Venus, and once again, we clearly see a hole inside the vortex. Take a look at Saturn's borealis. The problem with the current explanation of the solar winds is the fact that at this distance from the sun, the solar winds are too weak to create such a phenomena if we are to stick to the explanations given for our own borealis. Take a look at this recording and decide for yourself if we are, on Earth, the exception to the rule within our own solar system. So, as you can see here, and this is Saturn's hexagon in motion, but obviously right at the centre there, you've got that centrifugal force of Saturn spinning around in space. Now, obviously, this is a gas giant, but if we just literally take the idea that we, on the planet, mostly have liquid, are we to believe that our planet is the exception to the galactic rule, and that centrifugal force on water plays absolutely no part in forming a whirlpool described by so many explorers leading to an inner Earth, and there is absolutely no hole but a floating lump of ice? Well, I say a floating lump of ice. Remember, it might be buoyant, but apparently it doesn't move anywhere either over the millions of years. So although it's not supposed to be connected to anything, it seems to stay exactly in the right place for all of history. That in itself is quite an amazing feat. But is Earth an exception to the rule? You tell me. I personally think not. There are many other examples in our solar system, and with enough examples within our system itself, even if we extend that even further and take this to a galactic level, again, we see at the centre, literally, a black hole. Astronomers are now fairly certain that these supermassive black holes are at the heart of almost every galaxy in the universe. Furthermore, the mass of these black holes is somehow tied to the mass of the rest of the galaxy. They grow in tandem with each other. If we took this to its ultimate end, has the universe itself got an ultra-supermassive black hole that leads to an inner or alternative universe? Okay, I'm really speculating on this, but would it not follow these natural examples? And let us not forget the descriptions from the northern magnetic island called Rupes Nigra, and from Mercator's map, which describes the same whirlpool effect back in the 15th century, not even knowing about the same evidence being presented on other planetary bodies that we do today.